I didn't cry when she handed me the apron. I smiled, nodded, and walked back into the kitchen, pretending like this was perfectly normal. Like I hadn't paid for her wedding dress, the down payment on the venue, or even the first consultation with the caterer. She called it a favor. She said, "You're so good with people. You'll make it fun." But the truth was, she didn't want me in the photos, not in the speeches, not sitting with the family. I looked at the laminated chart she'd taped to the fridge. Drink station duties. My name was written in all caps, underlined twice. Everyone else had cute tasks. Flower girl helper, guest book table, escort card assistant. Mine looked like a job. Because it was. My hands trembled a little as I opened the fridge to restock the champagne. I stared at the bottles and tried to steady my breathing. This wasn't the first time she'd shoved me into the background. It wouldn't be the last. Unless I did something about it. It started 3 years ago. That's when she moved back home. I was already living there again after my breakup, trying to get back on my feet, juggling 2 part-time jobs and freelance graphic design gigs. She came back with a suitcase and a fiancé who spoke to me like I was the live-in help. Mom was thrilled. "The prodigal daughter returns," she said, arms open wide. I remember laughing in my room, the sound bitter in my throat. My sister had always been the golden one. Blonde, tall, brilliant at making people love her. I was quieter, better at listening than talking, and always 2 steps behind in the family group photos. She brought chaos into the house. Wedding magazines everywhere, swatches of ivory and blush fabrics, Pinterest boards open on 3 devices at once. Mom swooned at every detail. I mostly stayed out of the way, until the money talk started. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said one afternoon, entering my room without knocking. "But you make decent money now, right? Freelancing and all?" She smiled like we were just 2 sisters chatting. "We're a little over budget on the dress deposit, just $200. It was never just $200. First the dress, then the hair trial, then the engagement photographer. She promised she'd pay me back after the wedding, or when they got settled. I stopped counting after it passed $5,000. I didn't say no. I never did. That was my problem. I thought that helping her meant she'd see me, maybe even love me a little more. It's ridiculous now thinking I could earn my place in her heart with Venmo transfers and late-night pep talks. The morning of the wedding, I showed up early. I wore the dress she picked for me, plain navy blue, nothing too flashy. The hairstylist ignored me. The makeup artist skipped me. When I asked where I should sit during the ceremony, she looked up from her bouquet and said, "Oh, didn't Mom tell you? We're keeping it small. Family only near the front. But could you help Uncle Joe find his seat? He gets confused." I smiled. Of course I did. I guided people. I handed out programs. And then she handed me the apron. "Just during cocktail hour," she said. "The bartenders are late and you make the best mojitos." I tied it around my waist, walked behind the bar, and started slicing limes. My fingers worked automatically. My mind didn't. I kept seeing the flash of her white dress, her perfect teeth, the way she laughed like nothing in the world could touch her. Then I thought about the list I kept. Every payment, every favor. Every time she said just this once, and I said, "Okay." It was all in my phone, under a folder named Someday. I opened it. I printed it. And I folded the paper into a crisp square and placed it under her champagne flute at the sweetheart table. I didn't expect her to find it right away. The table was bustling with guests, photographers, and half-eaten canapes. She was too busy laughing, posing, and showing off the ring that I helped pay to resize. I stepped back into my bartender role, pouring Prosecco and fake smiling through drink orders, my eyes never drifting too far from her chair. I thought about crumpling the list and forgetting the whole thing. I almost did. But then I saw Mom. She was guiding guests past me like I was invisible, like the drink station was just part of the venue decor and not her other daughter, the one who hadn't made the seating chart. She gave me that same smile she always used when I came home with good news. The one that said, "Don't make things harder than they already are." I turned back to the glasses and kept pouring. About an hour later, the DJ announced it was time for the speeches. Everyone gathered around the stage. I stayed where I was. My sister's best friend took the mic and told a charming story about college parties and late-night heart-to-hearts. People laughed. I could hear the clinking of champagne flutes and the creak of white plastic chairs shifting on the patio. Then it was my sister's turn. She stood up, radiant in that dress, the one I paid the deposit for. She cleared her throat and looked at the crowd with practiced sweetness. "I just want to thank everyone here," she said, "especially my amazing family." Her eyes didn't meet mine. "You've supported me in ways I'll never forget." Lies slip out smoother when they're wrapped in flowers and applause. She continued, thanking vendors, childhood friends, even her yoga instructor. Not a word about me. I wasn't surprised, but I did feel it, like a dull blade twisting slow in my ribs. And then, just as she reached for her glass, she paused. Her fingers brushed the folded sheet under the stem. I saw her brow furrow. She hesitated, then unfolded it. Her smile faltered. Her eyes scanned line after line. The room didn't notice, but I did. I saw her throat tighten, the subtle inhale through her nose, the panic rising just under the surface. I'd listed every item, not out of spite, but because I needed her to see me, not as the help, not as the background character, but as the person who held her up when no one else did. Each line item had a date, a brief note, and a cost. Bridal gown fitting, $400 bachelorette decorations, $82 emergency florist reschedule fee, $150 makeup deposit, non-refundable, $95 save the dates printing, 123 bridesmaids robes, including hers, 210, and on and on. At the bottom, I'd written, total paid, 6th 4/28, total acknowledgement, $0. She folded the note and placed it in her lap. The mic was still in her hand. Everyone was waiting. She looked around the patio, scanning the crowd like her words had run away and left her stranded. I felt her eyes flick past me. For the first time, they didn't just look through me. They stopped. And that was enough. She forced a laugh. And lastly, a thank you to everyone who kept this day running smoothly, especially those behind the scenes. Her voice shook. It wasn't gratitude. It was embarrassment. Shame. But I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted her to feel what it was like to be invisible, if only for a moment. The DJ took back the mic. The music resumed. People returned to mingling. She didn't look at me again for the rest of the evening, but she didn't throw away the paper either. She folded it tighter, slipped it into her purse. And I untied the apron, walked to the edge of the patio, and took a long, quiet breath. The air outside was cooler than I expected. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the trees, casting a golden light over the parking lot and garden hedge. I stood near the edge of the patio, far enough that no one would notice me, close enough to hear the laughter inside. The kind of laughter that had always belonged to other people. I took off my shoes, letting the grass cool my feet, grounding myself. Someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, startled, and saw my cousin Rachel. She'd always been kind in that distant, once-a-year sort of way. "Hey," she said gently. I saw what happened. I blinked. "What do you mean?" She looked at me the way people do when they're about to say something real. "She read your list. And she should have. I don't know all the details, but I've noticed. For a long time." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. She hesitated, then reached into her clutch. "I want you to have this." It was a little card, a gift card for a local spa. "It's silly, but maybe take a day for yourself. You deserve that. More than anyone here." I smiled, holding back the sudden lump in my throat. "Thank you." She hugged me, brief but sincere, and walked back inside. That moment lingered. Someone had noticed. Not just the note, but me. It wasn't justice. It wasn't redemption. But it was the first crack in the dam. I spent the rest of the evening helping clean up, not because they asked, but because I needed to move, to keep from collapsing into the weight of the years that had led me to this moment. When I got home that night, still in my navy blue dress with wine stains on the hem, I collapsed on my bed. I stared at the ceiling, phone buzzing with texts I ignored. I opened my email instead. There it was. The acceptance letter I hadn't told anyone about. An art residency in Vermont. 3 months. Full housing, stipend included. I'd applied on a whim, in a rare act of courage, and they had chosen me. I sat up slowly, breathing it in. The timeline was tight. I'd have to leave in less than 3 weeks. But I was done waiting for permission to live my life. The next morning, I printed the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into a card addressed to my mother. No explanation. Just the letter and the return address. I didn't say goodbye to my sister. I packed slowly, carefully. Every item I placed in my suitcase felt like a step toward reclaiming something I hadn't even realized was mine. My sense of self. My right to say no. My right to be seen, not just used. In Vermont, everything smelled like pine needles and freedom. The other artists were strange and lovely and gentle in ways I wasn't used to. They asked questions, they listened. They didn't ask me to make anything for exposure or as a favor. They simply made space for me, and I grew in it. For weeks, I didn't hear from anyone back home, and I didn't reach out either. Until one day, I got an email. Subject line, "Thank you." It was from her, my sister. No greeting, no apology, just one paragraph. I read your list again, every word, and I realized I've never once asked what you needed. I was so busy starring in my own life that I didn't see how much of it was built on your shoulders. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I wanted you to know. I see it now, and I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hand hovered over the keyboard, unsure if I should respond, but I didn't. Some silences need time, and some acknowledgments are enough, for now. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The cabin had wide windows that let in a soft lavender light as the sky shifted from darkness to dawn. There was a stillness I hadn't known I craved. Not silence, but peace. A kind of stillness that lives in your bones when no one is demanding anything from you. No roles to perform, no invisible debts to repay. Just air and light and breath. I poured myself coffee and sat by the window, staring at the trees as mist curled around the pines. My sketchbook lay open in my lap, but I didn't draw right away. I just watched the light move. I had time now. Time I'd spent my whole life giving to other people. That email from my sister echoed in my mind. I hadn't replied, and I didn't feel guilty. For the first time, I was learning that not responding could be a kind of self-preservation, not cruelty. The residency director stopped by my studio that afternoon. He was a tall, quiet man named Joel, with eyes that always seemed to see a little deeper than you wanted them to. "I've been watching your work," he said. "There's a stillness in it, like grief, but also resilience." I nodded. "That sounds about right." He studied one of the pieces, a charcoal sketch of a woman with her hands full of invisible things. "Have you ever considered exhibiting?" I blinked. "What?" "There's a local gallery. Small but thoughtful. I think your work belongs there." My throat went dry. "No one's ever said that to me before." He smiled. "Maybe no one knew how to look." That night, I stood outside in the cold air, looking up at the stars. I thought about how many years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit into other people's stories. And I thought about how strange it felt to be the main character in my own for once. I didn't call my family. I didn't send updates. I didn't feel the need to justify anything. Until one day my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. On the fourth call, I picked up. She didn't say hello right away. Just breathed for a few seconds. Then finally, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, steady and calm. "I got your letter. The residency. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said gently. There was a long pause. "I thought you were happy helping," she said. "I thought I was too, but I was just afraid of not being needed." Another silence, but this one wasn't sharp. It was soft, like we were both seeing something for the first time. "I'm proud of you," she said eventually. "I wish I'd said it sooner." "Thank you," I whispered. We didn't talk much more after that. But when I hung up, I didn't feel hollow. I didn't feel erased. I felt like I had reclaimed something. A week later, my sister sent another message. This time, longer. She told me she'd spoken to Mom, that she was in therapy now, that she was trying to understand the patterns she'd inherited, that she realized how often she used charm to escape accountability, and how I had quietly carried everything she couldn't face. She asked if she could send me something. I told her she didn't need to, but she did anyway. A box arrived 2 weeks later. Inside, there was a framed photo from the wedding, not one of the ones where I was behind the drink station. It was one of the candid shots, me standing at the edge of the garden, sunlight on my face, apron off, eyes closed, smiling. Taped to the back was a note. "This is the only photo where you look free. I want to remember that version of you. And I want to meet her again someday." I held the frame for a long time, and then I placed it on the shelf above my desk, beside the first painting I'd ever sold. The gallery opening was quiet, intimate, just a few dozen people, local artists and patrons. There were tiny nameplates under each piece, and next to mine, a short paragraph Joel had asked me to write. I kept it simple. No dramatic stories, just a few lines about silence, wait, and learning to be seen. When people walked by and paused at my work, I didn't know where to look. I'd never been the center of attention for anything I created. My presence had always been a tool for others, something to hold things together behind the scenes. Now, people were looking, really looking, and asking me questions about composition, about feeling, about where the emotion came from. I gave vague answers, smiled politely. But inside, I was unraveling in the best way possible. Then I saw her, my sister. She was standing in the corner of the room holding a glass of white wine in both hands like a shield. Her eyes met mine. For a moment, I didn't move. I could have walked away, but I didn't. She approached slowly. Her dress was simple this time. No lace, no dramatic sleeves. Her hair pulled back, bare-faced, not performing, just herself. "I flew in last night," she said softly. "Mom told me about the show." I nodded. "This one's yours, right?" She pointed to the sketch of the woman with invisible weight in her arms. "It is." She stared at it for a long time. "It looks like me." I tilted my head. "How so?" "She's holding too much, pretending it's fine, pretending she's strong enough. But her eyes, they're tired." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "I've been thinking a lot," she continued, "about everything you carried, and how I never asked what it cost you." The air between us was quiet, gentle. "I'm sorry I made you feel like a servant at my wedding," she said, "and a stranger in our family." I took a breath. "I let it happen," I said, "for years. Because it was easier than disappointing people, easier than being the difficult one. But you weren't difficult," she said. "You were generous, and I mistook that for weakness." Her voice cracked then, just a little, and I believed her. "I don't want to fix everything today," she added. "I just want to sit with you, if that's okay." It was. We sat together on the bench in the middle of the gallery, not talking for a while. People passed by, glancing at the art, not knowing what they were witnessing. Two sisters, unlearning a lifetime of roles. One letting go of guilt, the other letting go of silence. Eventually, she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin envelope. "I made something," she said. "Not art. Just truth." I opened it later that night. It was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten. She had listed the same items I had on that folded paper, the wedding expenses. But next to each one, she'd written what it had meant to her. Not in numbers. In memories. "Dress deposit. I was falling apart that week, and you didn't make me beg. Florist fee. I screamed at the planner, and you took the blame. Save the dates. You stayed up until 3 a.m. reformatting the design because I changed my mind again." Each note was an acknowledgement. A mirror. A small brick in the rebuilding of trust. At the bottom, she had written, "You didn't serve me drinks that day. You served me grace. I didn't deserve it, but I see it now." I folded the letter slowly and tucked it into the same drawer where I kept my residency acceptance and the gallery flyer. A small archive of the life I was building, one truth at a time. I didn't reply to her letter right away. Some things need time to settle before you respond. But I carried it with me, in my bag, then folded into my journal, then resting on my nightstand like a quiet reminder that the story had shifted. That I had shifted. During the last week of the residency, the gallery owner approached me about a second showing. This time, a solo exhibition. My own name on the poster. My work alone on the walls. I stared at him, stunned. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Your pieces make people feel things, and they remember that. That's what good art does." That night, I stood in my studio and looked around at all I had made in those 3 months. The canvases, the sketches, the half-finished pieces taped to the wall. There was something sacred about it all. Not just the work, but the process. The way I'd filled each day with choices that were mine. No one else's vision, no one else's weight. I emailed my mom about the solo show. This time I invited her directly. No tests, no guilt, just an open door. She called the next day, her voice teary. "I'll be there," she said. "Front row." Then she paused. "Do you want me to invite your sister?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want her there, but because I wanted it to be my choice. And for the first time, it was. "Yes," I said. "She can come." Opening night arrived faster than I expected. The posters had gone up in town. My name in bold black lettering on a white background. I stared at it longer than I probably should have. It didn't feel real. It felt like a life I'd always wanted, but never thought I could claim. The gallery was quiet at first. A slow trickle of guests, polite smiles, soft chatter. Then, as the night grew, more people arrived. I stood by the door, thanking them, answering questions. I wore a simple black dress I'd bought for myself, not for anyone else's event. Not to blend in, just because I liked how it made me feel. Strong, grounded, real. Halfway through the evening, I spotted her. She walked in alone. No dramatic entrance, no expectation of recognition, just a quiet presence. She wore a deep green sweater and jeans. Her hair was down. She looked nervous. When our eyes met, she didn't smile right away. She just nodded. A small, respectful gesture. I nodded back. She moved through the gallery slowly, taking her time with each piece. When she reached the final one, a canvas titled The Empty Chair, she stopped. I watched her from across the room. She stood there for almost 10 minutes. And then finally, she turned and walked toward me. "This one," she said quietly, pointing over her shoulder. "Is it about that night?" I didn't pretend not to know which night she meant. "It is." She took a breath. "I think about it all the time now. The way I looked right through you. Like you were just convenient." Her voice caught. "I hate that version of me." I shook my head. "I don't need you to hate her. I just need you to never be her again." She swallowed hard, then reached into her coat pocket. "I have something else for you." She handed me a tiny folded square. I opened it. Inside was a photo. Me as a child, sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a crayon drawing. She had written on the back, "Before the world told us who we had to be." I looked up. Her eyes were full of tears, but so were mine. We didn't hug, not then. That would come later. For now, we just stood there. Two women, finally meeting each other not as sisters defined by roles, but as equals, both trying to become whole. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like I was serving anyone but myself. The gallery slowly emptied that night, the soft hum of conversations fading into the creak of floorboards, and the occasional sound of someone saying goodbye. I stayed until the last guest left, until the lights dimmed and only the spotlights over the art remained. My sister lingered near the back, silent, watching me as I thanked the owner, shook hands with the curator, and gently declined a journalist's request for a formal interview. Not tonight. Tonight was not about being seen by the world. It was about having finally seen myself. She waited until the room was nearly empty before walking toward me again. "I've been journaling," she said, without preamble, "since Vermont." I raised an eyebrow, quietly surprised. "It's not like your art," she added quickly. "It's messy, incomplete, but it helps." I nodded. "That's all it needs to be." She looked at the painting closest to us, a piece titled Held Breath, and said, "You ever feel like you were holding your breath for years and didn't even realize it?" "All the time," I said. She smiled, and for once, it wasn't performative. It was soft, human. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And you don't have to answer." I braced myself. "Do you think we can ever have a real relationship? Not as sisters, but as people?" I exhaled slowly. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think we're still too close to the fire. But I do believe people can change. You're showing me that." She didn't flinch at my honesty. That was new. "I'm learning," she said, "that being loved for your light doesn't excuse the shadows you cast." I looked at her then. Really looked. For the first time, I saw her without the pedestal, or the pedestal I'd kept trying to knock over. She was just a woman trying to be better. And I was a woman trying to heal. Maybe that was enough for now. We left the gallery together, walking side by side down the quiet sidewalk. The air was cold and clean, and the street lamps cast soft halos on the pavement. Neither of us spoke. There was no need to. The silence wasn't the sharp, resentful kind anymore. It was peace, space. At the corner, she turned to me. "I'm staying with a friend tonight, but I'd like to meet you for coffee tomorrow, if you're free." "I'll think about it," I said, with a small smile. She nodded like she understood, because this time she truly did. Back in my apartment, I took off my shoes, lit a candle, and poured a glass of water. I sat on the floor beside the window, knees pulled to my chest, and watched the city move quietly outside. My phone buzzed with congratulations from other artists, distant friends, even a few people from back home who'd somehow heard about the show. And then one message came in from Rachel, my cousin. "I saw photos from the show. You looked radiant. Grandma would have been so proud." That one stopped me. I hadn't thought about Grandma in a while, but she'd been the first person to see me as more than just someone's sister. When I was a child, she'd sat beside me at the kitchen table and asked me to describe the worlds in my drawings. Not just what I drew, but why. She was the first person who taught me that expression was a kind of truth, that even quiet people have powerful things to say. I got up, walked to the bookshelf, and found the old tin box where I kept her letters. I opened one, dated nearly a decade ago, the paper yellowed at the edges. One day, your heart will become too full to keep hidden. And when that day comes, let it spill onto canvas, onto paper, into the world. Don't let anyone convince you that your voice belongs behind someone else's. I closed the letter and placed it on my desk. Grandma had seen me long before anyone else did. And finally, I was starting to see myself too. The next morning, I sat at a small cafe on the corner of Maple and 7th, a quiet spot with cracked leather booths and windows that let the sunlight pour in like honey. I arrived early, not to impress her, but because I wanted time alone before anything heavy. I ordered tea instead of coffee. Something about the warmth felt more forgiving, more patient. I stared out the window and watched the city stir. Dog walkers, tired baristas, a couple arguing gently over croissants. And for a moment, I imagined a different life, one where none of this had happened, one where my sister had simply loved me well, and I hadn't spent so many years begging to be seen. But that version of life didn't make me who I was. This one did. She walked in 5 minutes late, eyes scanning the cafe nervously until she saw me. She gave a tiny wave and approached slowly, like she was afraid I might change my mind and vanish. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She sat down across from me, placing her purse carefully on the floor like it might break. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I said honestly. She smiled. Small, sheepish. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a while. I let it breathe. No rush, no need to perform. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I wanted to tell you something that I never had the courage to say." I waited. "When we were kids, I always felt like you were the stronger one. Not louder, not more popular, but solid, unshakable. And I hated that." Her voice wavered, but she kept going. "People adored me for being shiny, but with you, people listened. You didn't chase attention. It found you in moments that mattered, and that scared me." I blinked. "You were jealous of me?" She nodded, tears welling. "I know it doesn't make sense, but I was. I didn't know how to handle it, so I did what I always did. I turned everything into a stage, and I cast you as the helper. The quiet one. The support." I didn't respond. I was still processing, but she didn't expect forgiveness right away. That was new. "I talked to my therapist about the wedding," she continued. "About the drink station, about the list." She laughed, a sad sound. "She said I'd treated you like staff at my own celebration, and I cried because she was right." There was a long pause. "I'm not asking you to forget," she said, "or to pretend we're fine. I'm just asking for a new beginning, one where I earn my place beside you, not above you." I looked at her then, searching for that little girl I used to share a room with, the one who stole my socks and read my diary but cried when I scraped my knee. She was there, underneath the layers of performance and pride, waiting to be remembered. "I don't know what this beginning looks like," I said, "but I'm willing to see where it goes." She reached across the table slowly, palm up, not grabbing, not insisting, just offering, and I placed my hand in hers. The cafe around us faded a little. The city noise, the clinking cups, the low hum of music, it all softened. In that moment, it wasn't about who owed who. It wasn't about lists or apologies. It was about presence. Two people finally willing to show up. After she left, I stayed a while longer. I sketched in my notebook nothing profound, just the outline of two hands meeting across a table. No words, just the shape of something new. When I got home, a package was waiting at my door. It was a canvas, wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. No return label. Inside was a painting. My sister had tried to paint me. It wasn't perfect. The proportions were off, the color work unsure. But it was me, seated, calm, holding a brush, surrounded by light. Taped to the back was a note. "This is how I see you now. Creating. Whole. And finally, in your own frame." I stood there for a long time, fingers pressed to the edges of the canvas. It wasn't about the art. It was about the effort, the attempt, the humility of trying to understand someone you've misunderstood your whole life. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the pain, but honoring the effort it takes to make something new out of it. I hung the painting above my desk, not because it was flawless, but because it represented something I never thought I'd receive from her. Effort without ego. A gesture without strings. It felt like a slow untying of all the knots that had lived in our silence for so many years. The canvas became a small monument to growth, to choosing connection over comfort. A week later, I had a meeting with the gallery director. He'd invited me to apply for a fellowship, one that would fund a year of work with mentorship and studio space in the city. It was competitive, prestigious, the kind of opportunity I once thought belonged to other people. I walked into his office, a bundle of nerves hidden behind a firm handshake. "We've reviewed your portfolio," he said, sifting through a thick stack of papers. "And we're impressed, not just by your technique, but by your perspective. There's emotional weight in your work. It resonates." I tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach my eyes yet. Part of me still didn't know how to accept praise without shrinking. "You've been selected as one of the finalists," he added. My breath caught. He looked at me directly. "You belong in this space. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise." I left the building with trembling hands and a head full of noise. On the way home, I stopped at a little park nearby. I sat on a bench beneath a willow tree and stared at the pond, its surface calm but filled with hidden movement. I took out my sketch pad and began to draw, not from obligation, but instinct. I was beginning to understand that claiming my space didn't mean stealing it from someone else. It meant standing in it fully, not apologizing for existing. Later that night, I called my mom. She answered on the first ring. "I got nominated for the fellowship," I said. There was a pause, but a good one. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so proud of you. I wish Grandma could see this." "She does," I said softly. "I think she always did." There was another pause, quieter this time. "I've been thinking a lot," Mom said, "about how many times I looked past you. Not because I didn't love you, but because your sister demanded so much space. And I let her take it. I let that settle." "I don't blame you," I said. "I just wanted to be seen too." "I see you now," she said. "And I'm sorry it took this long." I didn't cry, but something shifted inside me, like an old ache finally exhaling. The next morning, I received a voice message from my sister. No dramatic opening, no jokes, just her voice, a little shaky, but steady. "I told Mom I used to see you as the backup plan, the safety net. And I hate that I made you wear that identity for so long. I'm not asking to erase it. Just to write something new over it, if you'll let me." I listened twice. Then I saved it. Some words deserve to be kept. That afternoon, I went into the studio and began a new painting. Large, bold, colorful. No grayscale, no hidden pain. Just motion. Arms reaching, feet grounded, head tilted toward light. I didn't know what it would be called yet, but I knew it was the beginning of something. Of me. Uncontained, unapologetic. And finally, untangled from the version of myself I'd been taught to perform. A few weeks later, the email arrived. The subject line was simple. Fellowship decision. My hands hovered over the trackpad before I clicked. For a second, I thought about closing the laptop and pretending it didn't exist, preserving the possibility just a little longer before risking disappointment. But I opened it. I'd been accepted. I sat still, blinking at the words on the screen, rereading the sentence again and again like it might vanish if I looked away. I'd won the fellowship. A full year to create, to grow, to step fully into myself with support, resources, and visibility I never thought I'd earn. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I just stood up, walked over to the mirror, and looked at myself. And for the first time, I didn't see the helper, the background shadow, the disposable sibling. I saw an artist. I saw me. The news traveled fast. The gallery posted about it. A few local newspapers reached out. People started tagging me on social media, celebrating like they'd always known I would succeed. Some had, others hadn't. But I wasn't interested in sorting who was who. I got a message from Rachel, my cousin. "Told you you were the real star in the family. So proud of you." Another message from a former professor. "It's about time the world caught up to what you've been quietly building." And then one from my sister. "Can I take you to dinner? No favors, no distractions. Just me wanting to celebrate you." We met at a small place near the gallery. No reservations, no cameras, no pressure. She was already seated when I arrived, nervously folding and refolding her napkin. When she saw me, she stood, not with the exaggerated enthusiasm of before. No performance, just respect. "You look strong," she said. "I feel it," I replied. We talked like two people learning how to speak each other's language. No stepping around landmines. Just walking slowly, honestly. She asked about my new project, about the emotions behind it. I asked about her therapy, her job, the quiet shifts in her life she hadn't shared before. At one point, she paused and reached into her bag. "I wasn't sure if I should give you this," she said, sliding a small envelope across the table. "But I wanted you to have it." I opened it carefully. Inside was a check. $6,128. The exact total from the list I'd given her on her wedding day. "I don't want this to define us," she said. "But I also don't want to pretend it didn't happen. This isn't to erase what you did. It's to acknowledge it. Fully. Without expecting anything in return." I stared at the paper. Not because I needed the money anymore. I didn't. But because it was the first time she gave me something I never had to ask for. "I'll deposit it," I said. "But I'm not cashing it for the money." She smiled, eyes glassy. "I know." We left the restaurant walking side by side, coats pulled tight against the evening breeze. We weren't hugging every 5 seconds. We weren't crying into our sleeves. We were just present. And that was more powerful than any dramatic reconciliation could have been. Later that week, I started painting again. But this time, something had changed. I wasn't painting through pain. I was painting through power. I called the new series Reclaimed. It was about all the pieces of myself I'd handed out to others, and how I was finally calling them back. The Reclaimed series began with small strokes, gentle, uncertain. Not because I doubted myself, but because I was exploring new ground. For so long, my art had been tethered to survival. Now it was rooted in choice, in joy, in complexity that wasn't always painful. The first canvas showed a single figure standing in a doorway, one foot still in the shadows, the other stepping into gold light. The title came to me before I finished painting, Threshold. Because that's what it felt like, standing on the edge of a life I was finally allowed to choose. The gallery set a date for the next solo exhibition, this time naming me in every press release, every flyer. Not as an emerging artist, but as the artist, the one people came to see. I sent invitations to a small group, my professor, Rachel, my mom, and yes, my sister. I didn't expect anything. I didn't need anything. I just wanted to offer space to the people who had shown me, in one way or another, that I was worth showing up for. The night of the opening, I wore deep green, the same color my sister had worn the first time she came to one of my shows, not in imitation, in evolution. It felt like reclaiming a memory, softening it, giving it new shape. The gallery was full within the hour. Strangers, collectors, students, and local artists filled the space with quiet awe. I floated between them, not to impress, but to witness. This wasn't about performance. It was about presence. The kind I had spent years giving to others and was finally allowing myself. In the far corner, I saw her, my sister. She wasn't alone this time. She brought a notebook, not a purse, and spent time with each piece, scribbling notes, tilting her head, asking questions of the docents. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see. When she reached the final piece, a painting called The List, she froze. It wasn't subtle. A massive canvas covered in layers of texture and abstract numbers. At a glance, it looked like storm clouds over ledger paper. But if you stepped closer, you'd see faint outlines, receipts, handwritten notes, scribbled IOUs, embedded beneath the paint like ghosts. She stood there for a long time. I approached carefully, not interrupting. When she finally noticed me, her eyes were full, not with tears, but with something quieter. Understanding. Gratitude. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And devastating." "It's truth," I said. She nodded. "I'm glad it exists, even if it hurts." I wanted to say something more, something soft and final, but the words weren't ready. Instead, I stepped back and let her linger. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the gallery had dimmed to its closing lights, we sat on the steps outside. The city was quiet around us. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. "Do you remember," she said eventually, "when we were little, and I made you play wedding with me? I wore the curtain and made you carry the stuffed animals like a flower girl? I laughed. Yeah, you kept telling me to smile more. She chuckled. I didn't know then what I was rehearsing, how I'd keep putting you in the background, even when we weren't playing. I looked at her, not with anger, but with clarity. And I kept agreeing, even when it hurt. She nodded. You don't do that anymore. No, I said, I don't. We sat there a while longer. Not as sisters with a history to fix, but as women who had learned how to be honest with themselves and with each other. When she left, she didn't hug me goodbye. She didn't need to. She simply said, I'll be back next month. I want to bring my therapist. She wants to see your work. That made me laugh. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl holding someone else's dreams. I felt like the woman finally living her own. A few days after the show, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. An actual handwritten letter with a wax seal and careful calligraphy. For a moment, I thought it was from a collector or maybe an old friend. But when I opened it, I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from my grandmother's best friend, Esther. We hadn't spoken in years. She used to visit when we were kids, bringing warm bread wrapped in tea towels and stories from her travels. After Grandma passed, she faded quietly into memory like so many things do. The letter was short but deeply felt. Your grandmother would have been breathless at your show. She always said you saw things others missed. I kept something for you. Something she asked me to hold on to until the right moment. I believe this is it. Enclosed was a small key, tarnished but still strong, and a second note folded neatly. It was Grandma's handwriting. For when you remember who you are, not who they told you to be. I stared at it for a long time. Then I knew what the key was for. Back in my mother's attic, tucked away in an old cedar trunk, there had been a locked compartment. Grandma used to keep it closed, saying it held unfinished stories. We'd never questioned it. When I moved out, the trunk stayed behind. I called my mom and asked if I could stop by. She didn't hesitate. Of course. Come whenever you're ready. Walking into the house felt different now. It used to sting. Walls lined with photos I wasn't in, rooms echoing with conversations I wasn't part of. But now I entered as someone whole. Someone who didn't need permission to take up space. We climbed to the attic together, dust catching in the beams of sunlight. The trunk was still there. Same smell. Same quiet weight. I knelt in front of it, key trembling in my hand. When the lock clicked open, I felt something shift. Inside were stacks of sketchbooks, wrapped in fabric, letters, notes, drafts of poems, all in Grandma's hand. But there was one item set apart, a leather-bound journal with my name on it. Not my sister's. Mine. Inside were entries she had written to me. About my art. About the quiet strength she saw in me even when I couldn't see it myself. One passage caught in my throat. You will spend years being needed, but not cherished. That will make you powerful, because love given without applause is the truest kind. But one day, you'll stop giving it away for free, and that will be the day your life begins. I closed the book and held it to my chest. Mom sat on the floor beside me, quiet, watching. I didn't know she wrote these, she said softly. I think she wanted me to find them when I was ready. She nodded. I'm glad you are. We didn't talk much after that. Just sat in the attic surrounded by dust and legacy. Two women learning to rebuild trust. One silence at a time. That night, I placed the journal on my bedside table. I didn't open it again right away. Some truths need to live beside you before you can absorb them fully. I slept with a strange peace. Not because everything was healed, but because the grief no longer owned me. I had walked through it. Not around it. Through it. And what I found on the other side wasn't just art. It was identity. Reclaimed. Refined. Mine. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The light hadn't reached the windows yet, but the room felt warm, grounded, alive. I turned my head toward the journal on the nightstand and let my fingers rest on the leather cover. Not to read it again. Just to acknowledge it was there. That she was there. Still guiding me long after she was gone. I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the floor beside my window, knees tucked under my chin. The world outside was still asleep, the sky a soft gradient of navy and ash. I opened my sketchbook and began to draw, not a planned piece, not something to exhibit, just shapes, shadows, flow. No pressure, no performance. Just me, breathing through ink. My phone buzzed, a message from the gallery director. Congratulations, One of your pieces was selected for the National Collection. You're officially entering the permanent archive. I stared at the screen, stunned. Not because I didn't believe it could happen, but because I had finally reached a point where I believed I deserved it. I let the weight of that truth settle in. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about recognition. It was about becoming. Later that day, I received a voice memo from my sister. Her voice was softer now, more grounded. I read the article about your show, the one that called your work the soft revolution. I cried, because that's exactly what you are. You didn't scream. You didn't tear anything down. You just quietly rebuilt yourself until no one could ignore it. You changed me, without ever asking me to. And I think that's the most powerful thing anyone can do. I sat with her words for a long time. There had been a time, not so long ago, when all I wanted was a grand apology, a public reckoning. But that desire had faded. What I wanted now was this: reflection, honesty, effort. The daily uncomfortable work of becoming better. I responded simply, I'm glad we're still choosing each other, even when it's hard. A week later, we attended a workshop together. Not as sisters, as women. She took notes. I asked questions. We laughed at each other's bad posture on the floor mats. When we left, we walked in silence for a few blocks before she said, I've stopped calling myself the bride when I talk about that day. I raised an eyebrow. I call it our family's wedding now. Because I finally see how much of it was built on your love. She reached into her bag and pulled out a new list. But this one was different, titled, Things I Never Thanked You For. It wasn't financial, it was emotional. For waking up early to steam my dress. For keeping calm when I lost the rings. For not walking away when I gave you every reason to. For serving more than drinks. For serving dignity, patience, grace. She folded it and placed it in my hand. I know you don't need this, she said. But I needed to write it. I tucked it into my coat pocket without looking at it. I'll read it when I'm ready. She smiled. That's fair. We stood at the corner as the light turned green, people brushing past us on all sides. And for the first time, we weren't trying to protect a memory. We were creating a new one with no aprons, no guest lists, no invisible roles, just space, and a willingness to grow inside it. A few days later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium at the National Archives exhibition hall. The invitation had come unexpectedly, a request for me to speak about my work, my journey, my transformation. They called it a spotlight segment, but I knew what it really was. It was a moment of recognition. The kind I used to fantasize about in silence while holding trays and fixing hems and making people comfortable at the expense of my own worth. Now, they wanted to hear my voice. I stepped onto the stage, heels quiet against the wood, hands trembling slightly but heart steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some not. I spotted Rachel near the front, beaming. My mother sat beside her, tissue already in hand. And to the far right, my sister. Still. Silent. Open. I took a breath. I used to believe my job was to stay out of the way. I began, voice calm but firm, to support, to soften, to serve. And I did it well. So well that most people never noticed what it cost. A pause. But silence doesn't erase contribution, and invisibility doesn't mean absence. I was always there, behind the curtain, behind the lens, behind the glass. I just hadn't yet learned how to frame myself. I looked toward the back of the room, letting my eyes rest there for a moment, grounding myself in the vastness of what had brought me here. My art is not about revenge. It's about reclamation, of space, of voice, of memory. Every canvas is a moment I chose to no longer be erased. I stepped back from the microphone. The applause came slow at first, like a tide building. But then it surged. People stood. People saw. And this time I didn't look down. Later that evening, after the exhibit closed, we all went out for dinner. A small restaurant, dim lights, thick tablecloths. My professor toasted. Rachel shared a childhood story that made everyone laugh. My mom held my hand the entire night. And my sister. She waited until we were alone on the walk back to the hotel. You know, she said, if you ever paint that moment, the one from the stage, I hope you title it Scene. I looked over at her, the city lights dancing in her eyes. That's exactly what I was thinking. She smiled. Not to impress. Not to charm. Just to connect. When we reached the lobby, she stopped before we went our separate ways. I used to think being the center of attention made me powerful, she said. But now I see. The real power was in being brave enough to stand alone when no one clapped. You did that, and I'll never forget it. She opened her arms slowly, and I walked into them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Later that night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I opened my journal and wrote, "Redemption doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the slow, steady rebuilding of what we once shattered with neglect. Tonight, something was rebuilt. Not fully, but enough." I closed the book and turned off the light. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, for the first time, I felt complete. Months passed. The fellowship came and went in a blur of color, critique, and quiet breakthroughs. I painted in sunlight. I cried on rainy days. I learned to start again, not because I failed, but because growth demands it. I sold my first major piece to a museum in Chicago. I was invited to speak at conferences, featured in journals, interviewed by people who had no idea I'd once been the girl handing out mojitos at her sister's wedding. But I never forgot. Not the drinks, not the folded list, not the silence I carried like a second skin. It didn't haunt me anymore. It simply reminded me that even when no one else acknowledged me, I had been there, contributing, showing up, loving without applause. One afternoon, I returned to my childhood home. My mom had asked me to help clean out the garage, and surprisingly, I said yes. There was something grounding about returning, not as the shadow, but as the person I'd become. Among the boxes of Christmas ornaments and old textbooks, I found a dusty bin labeled wedding stuff. I opened it. Inside were ribbons, unused name tags, broken candle holders, and at the very bottom, the original bar menu. Handwritten by me, water-stained, folded, forgotten. I picked it up gently, turning it over in my hands. For a second, the ache returned, the one I used to carry in my chest like a quiet bruise. But then I smiled, because now this wasn't a symbol of my invisibility. It was a symbol of what I survived. I placed it in a small folder labeled Keep. Later that week, my sister invited me to her house for dinner. She cooked, set the table herself. No apron for me, no expectations, just 2 plates, 2 glasses of wine, and music playing low in the background. At one point during the evening, she pulled out a large wrapped frame. "I know it's late," she said, "but I wanted to give you a wedding gift. Not for mine. For the wedding you deserved." I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a painting. She had painted me again, but differently this time. I was seated in a garden, hair loose, holding a glass of champagne. Around me were faceless figures, clapping, laughing, looking toward me. At the bottom was a tiny plaque. "The guest of honor." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She placed her hand on mine. "I see you," she whispered. And this time, I believed her. Later that night, I walked home under a sky freckled with stars. The streets were quiet, the air gentle. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one slicing limes behind the drink station, pretending she wasn't hurt, the one who wrote every expense down not to be paid back, but to feel real, the one who believed that service was the only way to be loved. I thanked her, because without her resilience, I wouldn't be here. Not as someone forgiven, but as someone who forgave herself. My story didn't end with a confrontation. It ended with clarity, with reclamation, with the quiet, dignified act of saying, I was never just the one who served. I was the one who stayed, who saw, who rose. And finally, I was the one who chose. Me. And if you've made it this far, maybe you've seen a piece of yourself in my story. Maybe you were the sibling who stayed quiet while others took the spotlight. Maybe you were the one who made everything easier for everyone else, and no one stopped to ask what it cost you. Maybe you've served drinks, wiped tears, paid the bills, stayed late, showed up, again and again, hoping someone would finally see you, and maybe, just maybe, you're still waiting for your moment. Let me tell you this, you don't need their permission to take up space. You don't need applause to make your worth real. You don't need a spotlight to be radiant. What you need is to stop apologizing for being the one who endured. Because strength doesn't always look like loudness. Sometimes it looks like staying soft in a world that tried to make you hard. Sometimes it looks like walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes it looks like printing the list and placing it under a champagne glass, not out of bitterness but out of truth. Because truth, when told with dignity, is the most powerful act of liberation there is. And if they made you feel invisible, then it's time to pick up the brush, It's time to tell your own story. It's time to stop serving what doesn't nourish you. And it's time to reclaim your seat, not at their table, but at the one you built with your own hands. You are not the assistant. You are not the backup plan. You are not the forgotten name on the family tree. You are the architect of your own becoming. So let this be your reminder. You are allowed to be the main character in your life. You are allowed to put the apron down, and you are allowed to say, with calm and clarity, I was there, I mattered, and I always will.